Mark Wunderlich's poems are alarmingly wise, lyrically charged, and built out of an almost otherworldly clarity. Traversing the hard artifacts of familial memory and the loss and cruelty of this earthly plane, Wunderlich makes an argument not for beauty, but for a clear eyed resilience. God of Nothingness is a book that is as devastating as it is life affirming, a weapon that both wounds and saves. Please, everyone, help me welcome Mark Wunderlich.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be here. Delighted to be reading semi-locally, since I'm here in the mid-Hudson Valley, so up near Catskill in Greene County. And it's a real pleasure for me to, of course, be joining Jill and Kazim and sharing this virtual stage. So thanks to everyone for being out there as well. I've been having a little connectivity problem here, a little bit. Fingers crossed that it's going to hold. So we'll see how it goes. Right now, I'm teaching a class in which I made all of the students who are participating take a pledge that they were going to write poems every day for the next 21 days or work on writing poetry. And I decided that I would do that along with them, even though it's, of course, a really busy time of year. But I thought, if I can't do it now, the real challenge, of course, is finding ways to do that when you are incredibly busy. So I'm going to do something that, of course, is ill-advised, which is to read a very, very new poem, one that I wrote as part of this challenge. And so I'm going to begin with that, and then I'm going to turn to the book. This is called For My Colonial Dead. In November, we would go into the frozen forest, leaves stripped, only a few birds ticking in the bare trees, fields shorn, corn trash a dull gold. Sometimes snow would fall, and I can recall the exact sound of its muffling, quieting whiteness crackling down. Of our hunting gang, only 2 of us are alive. Grandparents long dead, father and nephew dead, their bones all on the ridgetop with the others. The town is shabbier now too. Middle classes disappeared, leaving the angry, the ancient, and the slow. My brother is returning home to a place he reviled, having run out his luck in the West. His plan is to move into the garage of the old homestead, which of course is no plan at all. I sometimes hear the call to return, come back to the shady valley with its reliable breeze, the crumbling brindle bluffs, brandy old-fashioned made with 7-Up waiting on the sticky bar of the Golden Frog, recognition registering with those I meet when they greet my father looking back from inside my aging face. That place don't fade, the one that made me. Bone isotopes belie the soil's iron and chalk. My talk inflected. Sorry sounds like sore. What's more is that I want to go, but won't. I'll stay here, 2,000 miles away, amidst an older Eastern decay. It turns out I have some local dead here as well. 5th great-grandfather Christian Serfos, colonial kraut from the Palatine, who died in some wintertime foolishness crossing the frozen Mohawk. His 2 boys watched him and his horses drown in that not very impressive watercourse. One of those boys made it to Iowa and disappeared, but not before he reproduced, becoming 4th great-grandfather to yours truly, and so on. My remaining colonial dead lie in the dirt near Palatine Bridge, their names effaced from marble by acid rain. I wish I didn't care about them, but I do. It matters to have this ghost clan near, this family I never knew. So I'm going to turn to the book and read a few poems from it. There it is, product placement. The bats. I share my house with a colony of bats. They live in the roof peak, enter through a gap. At dusk, they fly out, dip into inverted arcs to catch what flutters or stings, what can only be hunted at night. Sunlight stops their flight, drives them into their hot chamber to rest and nest, troll faces pinched shut. I hear them scratch. In darkness, they chop and hazard through the sky around blue outlines of pines, pitch up over the old Dutch house we share. They scare some, but not me. I see them for what they seem, timid, wee, happy or lucky, pinned to the roof beams, stitched up in their ammonia reek, and private as dreams. Wooden box for John DiCarlo. John's ashes flew from Stockholm in a box, Anders stowed in the overhead compartment, brought it across the ocean to Provincetown, and when he put it down on the little side table, it's as if a cloud formed and we all went solemn as an absence filled the house. He was there by not being there, more thought than form, like the hard-backed books coffined on the shelves. The box stood sentinel throughout the day while guests ate oysters and sipped champagne. Someone played the piano and others sang. And after the sun had set and we mourners had our say, we carried the box to the breakwater where, illegally we knew, we would consign him to the bay. Someone scooped some ash into a pill bottle to keep some portion on their shelf. I did not want to keep a bit of that body here, so far beyond permission. Wanted him gone from this place as he did, the noose that took him a looping final script. In the dark, Anders clambered down the slippery rocks, clutching the box to his chest. No one spoke as John was poured out into the bay, his ashes washed with mud and sand, unwritten in this way. So the part of Wisconsin where I grew up is an area called the Driftless Zone. And that's a little area in, it covers a corner of Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And there, when the last ice age came down, the glacier missed this little area. So it sort of has bluffs and craggy sort of hills and things like that. And it's called the Driftless Zone. This is called a Driftless Sun. It came to me to sell the family farm, shift its failures to a man who planned to occupy the place for recreation, to hunt the deer that spook and shadow in the pines. My job to consign to another my granddad's stunted grove of walnuts planted against the forester's advice with his hired man Tiny, who died by stepping in front of a train, though first he roped his dog Bear to a nearby tree tacking on a note that read, "Take care off me." Does anyone remember this fat fact? A loaf of toast and a dozen eggs was Tiny's daily breakfast meal. Give it to me. I'll remember that bit too. I fished that muddy pond just once. Its manure slurry slipped downstream from the Tullius brothers' hogs. Shot the one buck trophied on my wall, whose crippled hoof had slowed him dangerously down. In town again, I pulled the locks off all the doors of the barn. Empty now, October now, the deer not yet come to any harm. This next poem is written in sort of kind of loose heroic couplets. And it was inspired by John Clare's poem, The Badger, which, if you know it, it's one of the saddest poems in the English language. And so this is a sort of an homage to that. And it's called Cuthbert. I had a lamb and named him Cuthbert. Cuthbert was what I named my little lamb. I fed him oats and I fed him corn. I fed him on the clover flushed with spring. I pet and patted Cuthbert every day, fed him on the brightest summer hay. Cuthbert, little Cuthbert, how he grew. I knew then what Cuthbert didn't know. I trained Cuthbert daily for the fair, led him with a gleaming halter in a ring. Spring drew on and dully led to summer. My little lamb was now a market wether. We took him in a trailer to the show. He bedded down in bright sawdust in his stall. I blackened Cuthbert's pretty cloven hooves. I carded Cuthbert's haunches with a comb. I oiled his black muzzle until it shone, and the day came to take him to the ring. The livestock judge opened Cuthbert's mouth, examined Cuthbert's single row of teeth. He patted hands on Cuthbert's meaty loin, moved us into a single showman's line. The judge returned, walked off, came back again, pulled us from the lineup, and then said, "This market wether was the finest in his class." That night, I put Cuthbert on the block. The auctioneer sang the money from the crowd. Cuthbert stood tensely, and I was proud. A banker bid the highest for the lamb. I led him through the sawdust to his pen, fed him a laudatory meal in his pan. By morning, the stalls stood empty in a row, and we children were invited to the show of the carcasses of market lambs and hogs, of Hereford steers trained docile as a dog. The bodies stripped of hides hung on their hooks. We filed past them, casting furtive looks. The carcasses bright surface white with fat. The room chilled cold enough so that the meat we grew stayed incorruptible and fresh. We exited the abattoir's cold light, and in the concrete hallway was the sight of heads struck dumb and staring by the door under plastic sheeting on the floor. To be taken to the mink farm, we were told, for every precious portion had been sold. His head looked out at nothing he could see. Cuthbert, little Cuthbert, you have nothing left for me. And I think I'll end with that one. Thank you so much to everyone out there. And I look forward to the other two readers.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was really beautiful. Thank you for that reading. So Now we're going to have a reading by Jill Bialowski. We have a blurb from her gorgeous book from Yusuf Kumunyaka. And Yusuf says, a collection of terse forms and psalms that adds up to a powerful, full-throated deliverance. Each trope captures life and death matters, a singing, a keening within each taut, well-made release. Rather than craving a physical space, asylum is sought in language, metaphor, meditation, yoga, query, and hope. And one of the joys of reading this collection is to feel its poignancy through verbal accretion. Asylum is experimental and at times nearly classical, but always intently alive with lyrical truths. Please, all of you, help me welcome Jill Bialowski.
Thank you, Jennifer. How lovely to read at the Hudson Valley Writer Center on Zoom with two wonderful poets. Mark, that was really beautiful. I love those rhymes and half rhymes, especially in that last poem you read. I'm going to read from Asylum, and it's a book length book of short lyric sections, and it explores the tension between extinction and survival in its many realms. And I'm going to read two sequences from the book that I pulled together. One was published in the Virginia Quarterly Review. And if any of you are past workshop students from the University of Iowa, you may remember some elements in this sequence. And in the morning sometimes awoke so cold, the wind in Iowa City was brutal, those days of doubt, those days of troubled land, that I did not want to get out of bed and creep down crooked stairs to the bathroom on the second floor, shared with two other graduate students, one also a poet who was innocuously quiet and thin, and the other a medical student studying the art of the body. I ate the same avocado, tomato, and cream cheese sandwich for lunch and dinner. Later in New York City, it was pasta shells with marinara or olive oil and broccoli. I liked the order and monotony because to want was to tempt the gods, because modesty was the equivalent of survival. In Iowa City, the restaurant where I worked on the weekend, I befriended another waitress, blonde and blue-eyed. She grew up in one of the remote farms outside of town where wind was ruthless and could overturn a truck. I was the first Jew she'd ever met. I caught her watching me sometimes. Why I thought I needed to rent a third floor attic. Why I thought one mattress on the floor, a desk, a vanity with a mirror. Why whether from grief, abundance, freckled blue-black sky, or soundless rain, humanity's pain, endless desire, the poem came. Like a flock of dispossessed in the city of converts, we found our way to the Shamrock, where the bikers congregated to play pool. To give of our body and to touch another's body felt like a religious act, like an act of loyalty and trust, not necessarily lust, but lust of the dispossessed, lust of the insatiable, of the lonely, lust of the powerful and privileged, lust of harm, of longing, lust that desecrates the soul and the body, terrible and never ending, lust that one sees in the eyes of another, lust of the violent, lust of the dominant, of the depraved, lust that sees a body as simply a vessel for one's lust. If someone was kind enough to take us driving out to the long roads that veered away from cornfields to the farms, pig roasts, and parties that lasted until dawn, where on one occasion we found ourselves in bed with someone we hardly knew and awoke laughing to escape the shame and thrill of it, then for that time there was a brief sojourn from the asylum in which the poem was held prisoner, asylum for which there was a cell that carried our self-doubts, a cell for lack of confidence, a cell for fear, for rage, a cell for emptiness, a cell for want, a cell for which there is no name, as there is no name for the ways we hoped language would save us. When he was small, I rented a little studio in a building on 95th Street so I could have a room of my own to write. The studio was the size of a bathroom. It was dark, dirty and dark, with gray painted floors and a shared bathroom in the hallway. I never met another inhabitant, though if I ventured to the bathroom, I occasionally saw a sliver of light underneath one of the closed doors. The only window in the studio faced the fire escape stairwell where pigeons like to coo, and I found that once I was in my studio, no words came. Every month I signed the rent check for the studio we could not afford, hoping that I would find an hour's peace in that space in which to arrange my thoughts that might then correspond to a line of verse or a paragraph of prose. I don't know why I needed to rent a studio in which to encourage words that fought against my desire to claim them. What are words when they meet the action of what they attempt to modify? What is snow but series on series of crystals of ice? What is pollen but a golden granular element of microscopic grains released from the male part of a flower? What are weeds but the aftermath of seeds the wind blows into a yard and threatens to overtake? What is grass but a blade of energy and a single instance of a mass? I was washing dishes in the sink. My hands were wet. The baby was crying. I was past due on my deployments. Listening to the radio, I heard the poet's voice. Her fear of being deemed a domestic poet. You will not undo us, the patriarch said, and the disdain in which it is held. And all the while the baby cried, and still there were the towels spinning in the dryer that needed folding, bottles to wash, formula to mix and warm, and the oven in which another poet rested her head that needed my attention. So this next sequence I'm going to read, I call Thrive, a lyric sequence. And all of the parts of this are in Asylum, but in different places, if that makes any sense. And this was published in Granta. I knew by then that anything was possible. Once we witnessed a child's cheek nearly cut out from another skater's blade during a fall as he swerved in and out of the skaters, the triple axle of envy, gluttony, and pride igniting their hearts, always someone who wanted to outdo another. We had to witness all of it. Because it had already happened, I had to be vigilant, cautious. Sometimes I held his hand tight because I knew. We kept our heads down. We were entranced, focused. Sometimes we could not see anything before us. That's what it required. One year I had forgotten the first leaves of spring. I had forgotten all the years of toil. I looked up and trees had flowered. All it took was waiting out the bleak winter, the hemisphere of darkness. The color was lime green. I wanted to tell her, this is what it's like. Like just awakening, drenched, they persist. Ghosts in our poems, ghosts in our imagination, ghosts in our waking hours, ghosts who elude philosophers, poets, scientists, psychiatrists, therapists, and doctors, ghosts who perpetuate, who guileless will not keep quiet, who preside over the populace and unknowingly rob the living, ghosts who made their own house be their gallows, Dante says, will never rest. Under microscope, magnifying glass using magnets and electricity, pin and tuning fork, lumber punctured, photographed, sketched, hypnotized, documented, compared, analyzed, tortured, starved, etherealized, objectified, and concretized, held prisoner by the perpetuators of a science, by the history of an era, by the myth of the unsolvable math of the mercurial mind. Daffodils, survivors of the cruelest month, tossing their heads in sprightly dance, from the ground arise, beautiful long spines and yellow crowns, tulips, class flower, hues fancied a fox, too excitable, too red. What we thought would thrive, we found a family of fragile evergreens we had planted one year. Bottom needles eaten out by starving deer. One we had to tie to a stake to keep steady and alive. Like the snap of a branch, like the terror of the wind, like roots dug up, like worms in the undergrowth, like the rat on the pavement smashed by the wheels of a car into an inconceivable pancake, like the inexplicable act of making a noose, hanging it from the ceiling and tightening it around the neck, like the argument in a forest, like a person who knows things, a person who can't forget, a person who probes, persists, and is unkind, like the mind hating itself, like the wind giving into logic, like thought murdering the body, like the night when the resilience of lavender, woody, spiky, tucked in the corner where deck meets earth, gave up and failed to thrive. Because it was Christmas and I was home with my fiance, because her blue eyes burned with the brightness of knowing and barely a fleck of gloom, because she was young and brave and still wore cheap and sexy dresses in which only she made elegant. And though she sometimes came home intoxicated and vomited from drink and wept alone, suffering from the human syndrome of need, want, and abandon, she still slept wearing a Bugs Bunny sweatshirt, made us all scrambled eggs, nursed her beloved cat, gossiped with girlfriends on her phone, and slept stone cold into the morning like Sleeping Beauty, awaiting a kiss, in a room under a vaulted ceiling of a synagogue of the holy and depraved, where I too once slept in the cradle of despair and rage. Because gods are threatening to tear down branches, uproot trees, because there is no reprimand, recourse, no release, rain unleashes in downpours, wind casting for answers for crimes committed, souls humiliated, denied passage, denied rest. There is no end to the flooding, no end of grief. In downpours, rain is unleashed. Metamorphosized into trees that for eternity bleed if cut or pruned or preyed upon, forever cast into hell's seventh circle, the lip above the chasm of pain, which holds the din of infinite grief, unable to settle, neither in heaven nor the underworld, the self-slaughtered. Hinduism considered its soul murder, Muslims hellfire, and in the eternal life, forever to inflict themselves with pain. Aristotle considered self-murder a crime against oneself and country. Jews denied a proper burial, and for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. There is no logic to divine, no pleasure or pain greater than human stain. A drawer of junk jewelry, combs and brushes, sweatshirts made of honor dress, wrapped in cellophane and stored like shadows in the closet's hinterland, diary with crushed pressed flowers, drawn red hearts, confessions, hopes, dreams, ink bleeding on onion skin, thin as leaves, novels with pages flagged, postcard of Mexico I once sent, lock of hair sealed under glass, of the rashness impassioned, forsaken, forever bemused, a life mask made of strips of paper mache, as if to mock the dead's eternal masquerade. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was gorgeous.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. What a great trio. Now we're going to hear from Kazim Ali, and this is his beautiful book. And Sam Sachs wrote this about it. Kazim Ali's newest collection of poems is brilliant and chilling and filled with sound. The voice of Sheila Chandra is alive with formal invention and innovation that will surely be a fixture in contemporary poetry for years to come. Part researched document, part song, part deep excavation of the soul. There is much to learn from this book. Ali forces us to contend with history and the present in order to imagine a future where we survive. Thank you so much. Please help me welcome Kazim Ali.
Thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's really wild to be here with Mark and Jill. It's been I've known these two people for many years, but we've never lived in the same place. So we sort of, drop in on each other, I guess, every now and then, which is really nice. And Jill, I think I haven't seen you in about 20 years, actually, probably. So this book, The Voice of Sheila Chandra, is comprised of 3 long poems. And I guess each of them tries to imagine what an individual under duress or stress, how can one live underneath what may seem like the monstrosity of history or the inevitability of history. And so the first long poem, actually, among other things, is about Corey Menifee, the dining hall worker at Yale University, who shattered a stained glass window in the dining hall at what was once called Calhoun College during the students' campaign to have the college renamed as part of the movement against university buildings, but also universities themselves, in the case of Brown University, being named after people who profited from the slave trade. And so that is the depiction of on the stained glass window. It's broken. The conservator at the Yale University Museums, where the museum was given, her name is Carol Snow. It is not the same person as the poet named Carol Snow. It is a different person with the same name. But she made this determination. And Carol Snow, the poet, actually writes about shatteredness. But Carol Snow decided to not restore the window. So I'm going to read from that first long poem, but only the opening, because I want to read a couple of other things from this book too. And that first long poem is called The Hesperine for David Berger. And David Berger was one of the young men who was on the Israeli Olympic team who was killed in Munich, Germany in 1972. Begin with a dining room attendant at the ivy-covered university who smashed the stained glass window because we are now going to try to change history. Imagine then in the suburbs of Cleveland, a sculpture of steel rings broken in halves, but opening up away from the bullet-ridden history of the burning helicopter toward the open sky. Imagine neither a conditional future if the past were different, nor forging ahead from the broken, but something newer that bridged that loss. History, as fragile as stained glass, and narratives that shape every movement forward. Both ways of understanding. David Berger, at 27, decided to move across the world to Israel to train and compete in the Olympics. 1972, Munich. What Corey Menifee did is he climbed up on top of the table in the dining room, and with the long handle of his broom, he sang in bits and pieces to God the road you knew, which was the confusion road, the one made of all your wrong turns. For each of you, a practice, says the Quran. If God had willed, he would have made you just one people. From this summit, I plummet then into the time of unstrung lyres to try to go back into the dark time. Do you know what your body is? Do you know what God is? Shattered, the panes of the stained glass window depicting enslaved workers bearing cotton along the road. Hesperus, the evening star, shines with a cold light through the tightest dawn, evenings sharp-edged and dissolute. He came into work in the dining room every day, and he hated that one image in the glass. And one day the sun is going down on the wrong horizon. The sea glows green, then blue, then green again. And this is where I was born, this in-between place. The star of evening's twin brother was Phosphorus, star of morning, who rose up in the dawn and brought new day, metaphor, of course, for new life. What is the sound of misdemeanors hefting the minutes like prison tattoos when they took David Berger and his roommates and then 5 others in the second apartment and sought? The window shattered and the glass rained down onto the street outside. The worker was arrested, but the university declined to press charges. The beautiful were made beautiful. The blood in their bodies sang, and in the rain of white phosphorus down into the streets of Gaza. I have come back to this village on the Mediterranean shore after 16 years. Who was I then? I was the same age as David Berger, the same age as Muhammad al-Khatib. But then the Greeks learned from the Babylonians that the evening star and the morning star that they had envisioned and made gods of and written poems about were in fact the same heavenly body. In either case, we are inventing the past, which means it's changing the future, which means the machine of time is actually a machine made of gears and parts. Munich, 1972. The road leads right through young men's brightest hours. No question of a Palestinian team, not then, not now. Ramallah, 2016, Muhammad al-Khatib laces up his running shoes, ridiculously trying to train as a sprinter with neither spikes nor coach nor starting block. Impossible to see, impossible to feel, to refract how finished the pattern is at every unfolding, the bright glass of many colors, the slaves hauling cotton shattered and flickering down, toward the concrete. And so I shout down with ragged throat this encroaching blue that brings dawn, then brightening day. Then David and his teammates, hustled by the kidnappers into a helicopter, bound for the airport, promised passage out of Germany. Muhammad seeks to shave tenths of seconds off his time. There is no accounting of a body towards its sport. This unending pattern of abstraction, to say we can inscribe ourselves into the landscape, we can change the past, we can write ourselves as a letter arriving unannounced to God with no return address. What other explanation does any scholar have for those verses of the Quran that are neither sentences nor sayings, but mere glyphs of letters? For example, this is real, this is in the Quran. There are these random clots of mysterious letters. Alif, Lam, Mim, Ta, Ha, Alif, Lam, Ra. Corey Menifee climbed up on the table. He just said, and this is a quote, this is what he said, "It's 2016. I shouldn't have to come to work and see things like that. That thing's coming down today. I'm tired of it." Muhammad left Palestine to go to Houston, Texas, at the invitation of Carl Lewis, where he found enough open space to run and train. "I only wanted to hear Palestine's anthem in the stadium," he said. David Berger left his home in Cleveland to move to Israel to lift weights and compete. And so at the end of all of it, when the bodies of the 10 others return to Israel for burial, David's body is flown back to Cleveland alone. These boys' bodies are made of particles that travel one into the other, and I curse the crepuscular moment, dark and light. Say, what are you? What is God? What isn't? And it was not until epochs later that the Romans looked into the sky at Phosphorus, whose name means bearer of light, and translated it into their own language as Lucifer, called also son of morning. Does every journey continue down the barrel of a gun from the Olympic Village to the helicopter, to the airport where the trick was played, to the shootout, the firestorm? What sound breaks the circle of action and reaction? And if space do bend, then time? Can history be unwoven, the tightness released to make it possible to breathe and write anew? Are we pieces made up of pieces, made up of pieces? Glass littering down the window to the street, clear, the sun shines through. In the suburbs of Cleveland, past the shopping mall, through the office park, nestled up against the interstate, is a pedestal, a memorial of black steel broken rings. How can one create in painting or sound, in the poetry of the body, a new and abiding future life? Bodies separated by years and miles and religion and law may release their own energy, may transfer into one another, may actually be the same body. Is the reality of the physical universe a continuum of time and space, or is it made of moments that can move backward and forward? Can the past be changed? Hesperus makes a play for the sacred space of grief. Phosphorus rains down upon Gaza into the bodies of unmade sprinters, weightlifters, pole vaulters, gymnasts. What if God is improvising? Ta, Sin, Meme. There is no time left. David has a plane to catch. He says goodbye to his parents. Ain, Sin, Qaf. The broomstick shatters the glass window and the image litters down. Qaf, Ha, Ya, Ain, Swad. A voice then breaks as evening covers us in a downpour. What else? Ya, Sin. And then, no, not in the present moment or in some deathless, wished-for past, but somewhere very ordinary, a normal day, a spring day perhaps, a little chilly. There is Muhammad in the hills above Ramallah, lacing up, even though there is no open ground to run, no coach to train him, no spikes for his shoes, no starting blocks. So I misled you. That was, I only planned to read you the opening of that poem, but I kept going. That was the radio cut, actually. It is a long poem that would probably take me about 15 minutes to read. So I read you a slice. I made a cut through it, which is like, yeah, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. It might mean I should have edited in the first place, but I hope you'll check it out. There's a lot more in the longer poem. So I think I'll just close with a couple of short poems from the middle section. The middle section of the book is the title section of the book. It's called The Voice of Sheila, Chandra. Thank you. So you know the longer poem, Amanda. So you know that that cut left out all the physics. There's a lot of physics in the poem. I'm kind of obsessed with John Coltrane, and the physicist at MIT named Stefan Alexander does a brilliant lecture on the John Coltrane's score, which is a drawing, which Stefan Alexander actually shows is the same as the equation, one of the important equations in quantum physics. So Coltrane was, I mean, he was on the next level anyways, right? Like his consciousness was elevated. And so Stefan Alexander takes very seriously that John Coltrane understood quantum mechanics. And so that's actually a greater part of the poem. All the part I didn't read was that part. It's kind of like when you go to a physics lecture, but you don't understand the math. So that's the version I gave you. So the central poem in the book, the title poem, is a series of 40 sonnets. And I'm just going to close with 3 of them, okay? The Voice of Sheila Chandra. She's a singer. Sheila Chandra is a singer. Breaks is constant, was like the river, the light on the river, riven that remained a rift, an old rill that sounded. She merged with the vibration of the drum, a hum, a home, womb, and she, moaned in the loam, dark earth, come, Sheila, dame, ocean, dome this poem, roam to tome, tomb, foam, original fountain that fed my mom, Zamzam, when I was born. Zamzam is a spring in Mecca. Long before she lost it, drifts unanchored, wanted to merge, and the body of the singer become the body of the instrument. Talk to the drum, find it, hum, study its vowels. She made her vow to sound slowly, syllable by syllable. She pronounced words in Uzbek, word unmoored, word pure, sound, O river. Long had I been, long seasons invaded by your current, devoured your tongue of water, those years time bent, my one voice spoke. And I'll end with this little one. Hold on one second, I want to find it. Okay. I'm the boy at the end, by the way, with the fear of falling, just so you know. Calligraphy is a meeting point between abstract and particular. By certain combinations of visual marks to make symbols, Sheila Chandra lost her voice around the same time I found mine. At midnight, we went to swim in the sea so we could be in the dark and not know the bottom, but the moon, the full moon, lit up the surface so silver, so slammed, and then the boy with the fear of failure, falling, architecture, voice, God, depths, death, he swam. Thank you.
Wow, thank you all so much. What an incredible reading. No wonder we've all been looking forward to this. So much people have been writing. It's been on my calendar all year. Thank you all for that great presentation of your poems. And what a testament to how you really need to hear poems, Zoom readings, poems in real life. We have a lot of questions coming in, a lot of praise coming in for all of you. So Sophia's going to save the chat and we'll send it to you afterwards. Everyone is thanking you for being here tonight and reading for us. We'll start out with a question for all of you. If you could talk a little bit about how these 3 books came into being. And whoever wants to start first, go ahead.
One of us has to go. So I'll just say very quickly, the book came into being, a lot of it was written rather quickly over a period of time. Many of the poems in this book are elegies, and in 2018, it was a year in which 8 people I was close to died. Including my poetry mentors, my father, a couple close friends, and so there was a real kind of urgency to trying to kind of get it all down, to try and remember the experience of having known those people, and you know, and I want experience to actually mean something. I want experiences to have some sort of meaning that can be taken. And for me, writing poems about those experiences makes that possible. So for me, this book was really about a kind of response to a series of losses in many ways. And the writing of the poems was a way of me to kind of, you know, make something of that experience and make it tangible and understandable.
I'll chime in now. My book Asylum was a book I think that I began about 5 years ago, and I wanted to think back about language and poetry and the formation of becoming a poet and that leap of faith. But then, you know, the administration, the world just seemed to dramatically shift. And I felt like the lyric poem itself couldn't really contain what I wanted to do. And I decided to think about Asylum as this long book-length poem that moves back and forth in time and, you know, brings in, I just read you know, one section which was more about survival and suicide, and then the first one about language and poetry to some degree. But the book also questions and circles around our political moment and fears of anti-Semitism and racism. And really, and there's a lot of trees in the book. And I really wanted to think about the way in which, you know, during such darkness, how does the human spirit survive? And that kind of became a mantra for me as I moved in and out of this book.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, Jill, Mark knows that I'm a great fan of his work. I've said that, I've reviewed his work, and you know, but I just want to say it's a really remarkable book, Jill. It's very, I think you're talking about the rupture of the lyric, or the lack of the ability of the lyric to encompass these tremendously huge seismic moments that we're experiencing. And I think we're experiencing them on a planetary basis. And I don't think it's mysterious why we're experiencing them. I think we're in a spiritual, and I think we're in an organismal, as an organism, as a global organism of a planet, as minute cells within this giant body, we are experiencing a form of crisis. And so I think that really since the mid 90s, there has been this, desperate rupture of what the kind of the classic lyric. And you saw these books like Joria Graham's End of Beauty, or Lucy Brock-Broido, you mentioned her, Mark, The Master Letters, or Mary Jo Bang's book Elegy, although that was specifically occasioned by the death of her son. But you saw the many writers, or Marie Howe's book, What the Living Do, or and she invokes Carolyn Forcher's End of Beauty, End of History, Angel of History. But there's this moment where it's like, well, the lyric is not going to hold it anymore, and it breaks out. And so what you did with that is like, it's a book length. It's like a serial. Is it one long poem? Is it like multiple shards that make up a sequence? There's not really an answer for that, right? It's kind of all of those things at once. And that's where I was too when I was writing. My book was occasioned by the Academy of American Poets and the Park Association. We're doing a joint project for the 50th anniversary of the National Parks Association, creation of the national parks, which is a weird, institution in and of itself, designed at least partially to steal Indigenous land. But I was cheerful about it. They were asking one poet from each state. And at the time I lived in Ohio, which I suppose increased my odds of being chosen, as opposed to, say, if I had lived in California then, I'm sure there'd be 100 other poets in front of me. But at any rate, they asked a poet from each state to write about a national park in that state. And so I was looking through, they send me the list of all the national parks that are located in Ohio. And I came to find one called the David Berger Memorial. And I had no idea who David Berger was at the time. But that is where David Berger was born and raised. And so that's where he's buried, and that's where the memorial is. But at that same time, I was traveling regularly, but during the winter months, back to Ramallah in Palestine, where I had spent part of my sabbatical several years earlier. And I was teaching yoga, and I was training yoga teachers. And one of my yoga students was this guy, Muhammad Al-Khatib, who decided that he was going to train to qualify for Rio, to sprint in Rio. And Carl Lewis came to know of him through the vegan network, the vegan mafia, and invited him to Houston to train. And so he did train for Rio. He did not qualify for Rio. He did qualify for Tokyo, but was not able to run in Tokyo. But it was those two men, the two young men, they're the same age. Muhammad was 27 when I knew him. David Berger was 27. And that started the book. It was the sort of the seed of the book. And the other poems came out of that. Actually, the Sheila Chandra sonnets were a journal that I was keeping while I was writing the first poem. And then the last poem in the book came about because C.A. Conrad came to town, and I was in Berlin at the time, and he gave a workshop on, he does the workshops with, like, you take crystals and you put them down your pants and do all kinds of magical things with them. And so I wrote a poem doing all these rituals that he concocted, and that's where the last poem came from. So it's a really focused, I wish I had something very philosophical to say about how the book came to be written. It was very practical, and it was written quickly in the course of about 4 months. It took a long time to revise it and make it proper, but the initial writing was very quick.
Well, thank you all for answering that question with such extensive answers. That was great to know. We had John Murillo read recently, and he has a lot of very long narrative poems, but that braid a lot of different events.
Say his name again.
John Murillo.
Oh, John Murillo. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Four-Way Books poet. And I think that you're right that a lot of poets since the 90s have been doing this this ruptured lyric style, and it's working really well for our moment. We have a lot of poetry students in our audience tonight. What would you say to people who are working on putting together a first poetry collection? Any tidbits of advice?
Okay, I'm going to be half flip, which is don't. And I don't mean don't publish a book. I'm not that person who's going to tell you that. But I think it's about the effort or the intention of, I'm now trying to make a book. I would say just read a lot, write a lot, make good poems, and let the weight of the work, the magnetism of the lodestone of the work kind of like start to coalesce of its own piece. I would say have less intention about it. That's my thought.
I would say the same thing, Kazim, in that, Stanley Kunitz used to say, he was once approached by a young poet who said, Stanley, I have a great idea for a new poem. And he said, that's too bad. And, of course, what he was saying or suggesting there is that a poem is not an idea, right? That a poem is actually a complex individual work of art in the same way that a dance is, or a painting is, or a piece of music is. And that if we set out to write a poem with an idea, with something that we intend to say, then we've already, we're already losing, because the poem then stops being this exploration of what it is you don't know about something. Instead of being a kind of probing into unknowingness, into the thing that we don't understand, and the pursuit of those important questions, we set out and we make a kind of preachment, or we say something that we think needs saying, as opposed to further, more complex implications of the self, right, which begin to happen when we ask questions as opposed to seeking to answer them. So that's often what I think of. I often tell my students, don't be the hero or the victim of your own poem. That positioning yourself as either one of those things in your poem is also a kind of losing proposition. That we exist between those two things. We are all sometimes victims, and we all can sometimes be heroes. But I think that we need to apply the kind of great ambivalences, the great areas of confusion and unknowingness in our poems. So I would say to someone putting a book together, don't predetermine what it is you're doing. Use it as an opportunity to explore. So there's my advice.
Mm. I like that a lot, Mark. I would just add to both what you and Kazim have said, that just to let the process direct you, that it's all a process. One poem can lead to another poem. Somehow I always feel that poems speak to one another because they're coming from a central being, and to just allow the process to happen. And someone once told me that every book should sort of try and reinvent the form, and that's something that stayed with me that I wanted to share.
I have two terrifyingly practical pieces of advice as well, which is, so I work as an editor too, and I was getting ready to publish a book by Michael Burkhardt with Nightboat Books, which is the press that I work with. And Michael, if any of you on this call know him, when he sent the manuscript in, it was just like a box of poems, not even typed up. Like some of them were in dot matrix. Do you remember dot matrix? Some of us on this Zoom remember dot matrix. And I wrote to him and I said, Michael, like, is there an order here? And he said, just put it in alphabetical order by title. And I was super skeptical. I just thought, God, you're such a brilliant poet. This is so very lazy. I'm not interested in doing this for you. But I went ahead and did it, and I read it, and I thought, like, wow, this really reads as a book. It's really good, because each individual poem had its own integrity and its own power. And then the second example I want to give to you is Marie Ponceau, the late and great, many, many years ago, actually maybe not that many years ago, had a selected poems. And I'd asked her, she was not my thesis advisor, she was one of my professors at NYU in my MFA. And I asked her, what is it like to choose from a whole? Because she went for 27 years or something like that without publishing a book, between her second book and her third book, it was nearly 3 decades. And she said, I was raising these 6 kids. I was writing the whole time. I just didn't have time to be doing the whole publishing racket and publishing books. So I had these folders full of poems. I just wasn't publishing them. So when it came time to do my selected poems, I wanted to think about the integrity of my body of work as a whole. And I decided the only way to do it, to ensure that I was working on all the poems carefully enough and that they were all like really good poems, is, and as far as I know, this is what she actually did, but what she claims she did to me is she took every folder was by year, and she randomly pulled one poem out of each folder for each year that she was writing, from whenever she first began to like that same year. And that's what the selected poems is. So I feel like if you have that level of integrity as a poet and attention to your work, that you have the chutzpah to, and like, you know, to just, this is going to be my selected poems. I'm that good, you know? I think that's like solid practice right there. And she was right, of course.
Oh, those were all such great answers. Thank you, everyone. I have a question based on all of your very thorough and insightful answers, which is, what would you say distinguishes the exploration phase of your writing from the manuscript phase? When do you switch modes or realize that what you're exploring is actually a collection?
I'll go first and quickly. I don't really know. I don't think one knows. I mean, I don't think any of the three of us intend to be like woo-woo. I really want to give you practical advice. I truly do. But I think it is just like you are working on something for a long time and you start to discern the shape of it. It's very literally when you're in a dark room, if you're in the dark room long enough, you can start to see things. You can even read in the dark if you sit there in the dark long enough. Have you noticed that? So I feel like at a certain point when I was working on this book, it changed. I mean, in the beginning, I had 9 poems, then it went down to 7, then it went down to 3. Then Sam Sachs actually told me, wouldn't it be nice if there were short little fragmented poems in between the 3 long poems? So that's its current shape. There's these 4 little shards, and then the 3 long poems are in between all of them. So it's just like organic, you know. I don't think, and even those poems that, even those books that seem like they're as tight as a book could be, like you know, The Wild Iris or something like that. I'm sure there are just like dozens of other pages that got taken out or got put in. I don't think it's like, there's no science behind it.
I would just say that I have come to think of writing poetry or writing anything really as a practice. You know, when I started taking up yoga about 7 years ago, what was so amazing to me is that, you know, those of you who practice, you know that, you know, one shift of you know, how you're holding an arm, or the way that your body is turned can change the whole mechanism of the pose. And the same thing is for working on a poem, you know. Every word, you know, you add a word and the poem can shift, or you change the syntax. And so I just have come to think about poetry very much as a practice that you come to whenever you can. And, you know, working on a book for me is just stepping into it, stepping out of it, stepping into it, stepping out of it, in a certain kind of rhythm and voices. Like Kazim, I don't want to be woo-woo about it, but it's true that, you know, there's this, when you've landed on something, you know it, and you follow this journey. So that's all I want to say.
I love these answers, and you know, the only thing I would add is that what I'm trying to do is to write a book that I would want to read, you know, and to write the kind of book that I think also doesn't exist yet, you know, that is out there, that But I also, I've found when I was reading, I had this kind of revelation when I was on the jury for the National Book Award a couple of years ago, and reading, hundreds of books of poems. And I came to this revelation that I just love individual poems. Like I really love the integrity of an individual poem, and that I just, when I came upon them, I thought, oh, this is so wonderful to read this, to read this thing. It's a kind of object. You can kind of walk around all sides of it and see it. And it sort of made me, in working on this book, I thought, oh, that's, I want these poems to be able to stand and to have this kind of these individual qualities. And so it was I think that by reading a lot, it began to influence my notions of what I wanted a book to be like and how I wanted people to read it and see it. But mostly I try and work on individual poems. When I write them, I like put them in this binder, I like print the poem and I stick it in here. And like, once I get a bunch of them in there, I can start to read them as a group and see, do these cohere? Do they have something to do with each other? And then begin to kind of arrange them and think about them.
I love that you said that you read a lot. I think that is really the key also, is, reading volumes, thinking about how poets put their book together. It's probably, you can probably learn more doing that than anything.
Yeah, and I reread these books that I love so much and go over them again. I was just like looking at this. Here's a like Linda Gregg. I was rereading this big selected poems of Linda Gregg and thinking, God, these are so good. These poems are so good. Yeah, it was like one of those kind of revelatory moments, and it was such a delight to go back in and re-enter those poems again and think about them and think about those books as I experience them. This is a new and selected, but anyway, you're absolutely right, Jill. It's like being, you're when you're working on a book, you're trying to, I'm sitting here in this room with these, like all of these books behind me on my bookshelf, which you see sort of goes, and those are all poetry books. That's all my poetry collection. And when this is where I write. When I sit here, I think, oh, I can kind of reach back and pull one of these voices off the shelf and bring it forward into it. And for me, that's what writing a book of poems is. It's like, I have all of these things behind me. They're all there backing me up. And my job is to sort of carry it forward into the future a little bit for as much as I'm able to.
Well, thank you all so much for this incredible reading. It was really wonderful to hear all of you. And Mark, thank you for this poem that you wrote for Lucy. I felt like she was in the room when I read that poem for the first time. It's really gorgeous. And that's the first time I ever met you. You came to talk to Lucy's class.
Oh, yes, I remember that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for taking so much time with us to answer our questions. Please don't forget to buy these books. As you can see, they are gorgeous, and the words, as you've heard, are gorgeous. So thank you all for being here. We have recorded this, so if you missed the beginning, if you want to hear what everyone has said again, if you want to hear parts of it again, please look on our YouTube channel. It will be up in a day or two, thanks to Sophia and her hard work. So hope to see all of you back here on Sunday when Aaron